Get out of my house! My son shouted in front of everyone. I froze, tears burning my eyes as whispers filled the room. A mother's heart broke that night. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's traveled. His voice cracked through the night, shaking the walls more than the storm outside. Get out of my house! My son, my own flesh and blood, screamed those words like a curse, like a knife pressed against my throat. I stood there frozen, drenched in betrayal, the keys trembling in my hand. And then I turned. I locked the door. Behind him. Forever. The sound of breaking glass still echoes in my head, sharp and merciless, like the world itself wanted to pierce me open. It was past midnight when my son's voice split through the house like a blade. Get out of my house! His words didn't stumble. They tore, they shredded. My knees trembled, but my heart, it burned. Imagine raising someone, feeding them from your own hands, only to watch them throw you out like spoiled food. I stood barefoot on the cold tiles, shards of a wine glass beneath me, the one I dropped when his voice thundered through the walls. My toes stung, tiny cuts opening, but I barely noticed. Pain in my body was nothing compared to the storm flooding my chest. My son's eyes, once soft with boyish mischief, now flared with rage I couldn't recognize. Was this really the same child who used to beg me to sing him to sleep? Or had a stranger stolen his face? I whispered his name once, twice, but he didn't hear me. Or maybe he refused to. His shoulders rose, his jaw clenched, and behind him I saw the flicker of faces. 13 people, neighbors, cousins, so-called friends, silent witnesses scattered across the living room. They had been there for dinner, for laughter, for the performance of family unity. But now they sat frozen, eyes darting between us, drinking in my humiliation like it was wine they'd been saving. Do you know what betrayal tastes like? It tastes like iron, thick and metallic on your tongue, when your own blood cuts you deeper than any knife. My son's voice rose again, and this time he pointed toward the door. Leave, tonight, now. Each word was a hammer pounding nails into my chest. I should have begged. I should have pleaded with him in front of them all. That's what a good mother would do, right? But my mouth stayed closed. My spine straightened. Something inside me snapped. Not a weak snap, but a clean, sharp break, like a rope finally giving way under too much weight. And then it happened. My hand, trembling only slightly, reached for the key on the mantel. I don't know what made me do it. Rage, fear, pride, maybe all three twisted together, but I turned. My fingers wrapped around cold brass. I stepped toward the door. I felt every eye burn holes into my back as the storm outside screamed louder. And then, click, the lock slid into place. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of an executioner's drum. My son's face drained of color. For the first time that night, he looked shaken, as though he hadn't expected me to have that kind of strength, or that kind of cruelty. His lips parted, searching for words, but silence poured out instead. I turned to him slowly, letting the stormlight from the window frame my face. And I whispered so low only he could hear, "No, this is my house." The air thickened. No one moved. I could hear someone's glass tipping over, the faint trickle of red wine spreading across the floor like spilled blood. The storm outside rattled the windows, begging to come in, but inside, time froze. My son's fists clenched. His chest rose and fell, every breath a battle. And behind him, those 13 witnesses leaned closer, waiting, needing, craving to see how far this war between mother and son would go. He finally spat out, voice raw with venom. "Then you'll regret this." My pulse hammered in my ears. I had no idea then how true his words would be. His threat lingered in the air like smoke, wrapping around every guest, choking the room. "You'll regret this." Those words dug under my skin, nesting there, festering. I wanted to scream back, to tell him he had no right to throw me out of the very walls I bled to build. But the words never left my mouth. Instead, I smiled. a small, bitter smile that made even the candles on the table flicker uneasy. Have you ever smiled not out of joy but as armor? That was me, masking a wound with the sharpest grin I could summon. My son's glare met mine, a war of eyes neither of us willing to lose. And in that silence I realized something terrifying. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted me erased. I scanned the faces behind him. Neighbors who had eaten my food, cousins who once borrowed my money, church friends who hugged me every Sunday, they all looked away when my gaze found them. Not one of them defended me. Not one dared to speak. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just silence so thick it drowns you. A chair scraped. Aunt Layla, her perfume still clinging from the dinner, finally broke the stillness. Maybe you two should talk tomorrow, she muttered, eyes glued to the floor. Tomorrow? As if my son hadn't just declared me an intruder in my own home. As if this wasn't the kind of wound that bleeds through centuries. I wanted to shout, to drag them all out into the storm, to slam the door in their faces. But my body betrayed me. My knees buckled. The room tilted, the edges of my vision blurred, and the copper taste of blood reached my tongue. I realized I had sliced my foot on the glass earlier, thin crimson trails now marking the white tiles like warnings. My humiliation wasn't enough. My body had to bleed too, my son noticed. For a fraction of a second, his rage faltered. His eyes darted down at the blood. His lips parted. And there it was, that flicker of concern, the ghost of the boy I once knew. But it vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed whole by his pride. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "They'll all see you for what you are," he hissed. "Crazy, controlling. You think you're the victim, but everyone knows the truth." My chest tightened. The truth? What truth had he twisted against me? I searched his face, desperate, but he turned away, pacing toward the guests like a performer about to take the stage. His voice rose, loud and theatrical, dripping venom. "You see? This is what I live with. The drama, the manipulation, the lies. She won't leave even when I beg her to. She'd rather bleed on the floor than let go." A low murmur spread across the room. Some guests shook their heads. Others avoided my eyes, guilty but unwilling to intervene. I wanted to scream that he was lying, that I was the one who sacrificed, who gave, who suffered in silence. But the words stuck in my throat, thick and choking, as though my own body was silencing me. And then, as the storm rattled the windows, my son delivered his final blow of the night. "This house isn't hers anymore. It's mine, and I'll prove it." My breath caught. His tone wasn't just defiant, it was calculated. He had something planned, something bigger than this public humiliation. And from the smug tilt of his chin, he was ready to unveil it soon. The word prove echoed in my head long after it left his mouth. What did he mean? Prove what? My pulse thudded heavy in my chest, each beat a warning drum. The room, filled with 13 witnesses, grew restless. They leaned in as if this was theater in my life, the stage. And maybe it was. Maybe he had rehearsed this moment, line by line, waiting for the exact second to strike. I steadied myself against the edge of the table, ignoring the sting in my foot. My blood was drying in thin streaks across the tile, but I refused to show pain. Weakness was what he wanted. A mother on her knees, a villain exposed. Not tonight. Not ever. He walked to the mantel, the same mantel where family photos once smiled down at us, back when the word home meant something. With deliberate care, he lifted a small stack of papers, hidden there beneath the framed picture of him at graduation. My breath caught. I hadn't seen him place them there. He held the stack high like evidence in a trial. His eyes met mine, sharp and merciless. "Do you all want the truth?" he asked the guests, his voice rising over the thunder. "Here it is." A ripple ran through the room. Whispers, shifting chairs, the scrape of shoes against the floor. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the storm anymore. He flipped through the pages, his smile thin and cruel. "These," he declared, "are letters. Letters she wrote. Proof of how she controls, manipulates, spies. Proof of who she really is," gasps erupted, low but cutting. My hands clenched into fists. Letters? Yes, I had written things. Private confessions, angry thoughts scribbled in moments of weakness, unsent notes meant only for my eyes. How had he gotten them? And worse, how much of my pain was he about to turn into his weapon? I forced my voice steady, though my throat burned. "Those are lies," I said, each word slow, deliberate. But even as I spoke, I knew the crowd wouldn't believe me. Lies or not, once words are read aloud, they become truth in the ears of others. He shook the papers, waving them like flags of victory. "You hear that?" She admits it. She calls them lies before you've even read them. That's guilt. His smile widened. That's fear. My stomach twisted. Every eye was on me. Every breath I took felt heavy, labored, as though the air itself had turned against me. And yet, underneath the shame, underneath the rage, something darker stirred. Cold, patient, calculating. If he wanted war, I would give him war, but not here. Not tonight. Not when my blood still marked the floor. I straightened, my voice low, calm, a whisper slicing through the storm. "Careful, son. The truth has teeth, and it bites back harder than you think." His smirk faltered, just for a second, just enough for me to see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He turned away quickly, hiding it behind bravado, but I had seen it. And that single glimpse of weakness was enough to feed the fire burning inside me. The guests shifted uncomfortably. The storm outside roared louder, as though urging the night toward collapse. My son clutched the papers tighter, raising them once more. And just as his mouth opened to spill the first line, the power cut. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Gasps, a scream. The sharp crash of glass hitting the floor, and in that pitch-black silence, I smiled again, because I knew this was only the beginning. The blackout stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it couldn't have been more than a minute. Darkness has a way of twisting seconds into lifetimes. In that void, every breath, every shuffle of feet, every muffled gasp seemed amplified. I could hear my son somewhere in the shadows, clutching his stolen evidence, but the confidence in his voice had vanished. Without an audience watching his smirk, he was just a boy fumbling in the dark. And me? I stood perfectly still. My blood still stained the floor, my body still ached, but I welcomed the silence. In that quiet, I heard something more powerful than his accusations. I heard the walls breathe. Old houses keep secrets, and mine was no different. Every creak, every groan seemed to whisper, "Not yet. Wait. Watch." When the lights finally sputtered back, a dim yellow glow flooded the room. The guests blinked, shaken, their faces pale and uneasy. My son still held the papers, but his grip had loosened. The storm outside had slowed, raindrops trickling like beads down the glass, softening the air, but not the tension. No one dared to speak. I stepped forward, slow, deliberate, the floor cool beneath my bloodied foot. My voice, when it came, was calm. "You've shown them nothing," I said. "Pieces of paper, scribbles, not proof." My gaze swept the room, daring anyone to argue. No one did. Their eyes dropped, their lips sealed. Cowards, all of them. They wanted a spectacle, not the truth. But I knew the truth wouldn't stay buried. Not in this house. Later that night, after the guests fled into the storm, leaving only the echoes of their whispers behind, I sat alone in the kitchen. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. My son had locked himself in his room upstairs, his shadow pacing under the crack of his door. I stared at the stack of dirty plates, the remnants of the dinner that had turned into a battlefield, and I thought of every secret he thought he could use against me. Because secrets run both ways. I knew his. 2. The whispered phone calls at 2 a.m., the smell of smoke clinging to his jacket, the missing cash from my drawer, the hushed conversations with people I didn't trust, people who looked at me with pity, with judgment, as though they already knew my place in this tragedy. He wasn't the innocent he wanted them to see. He wasn't the victim. But in his arrogance, he thought those walls upstairs kept his secrets safe. He thought I hadn't noticed. He thought I hadn't listened. But oh, I listened. That night, when the storm faded into silence, I crept through the hallway. The wooden planks groaned under my weight, but I had long learned which ones sang and which ones stayed quiet. Outside his room, I stood still, ear pressed against the door. His voice drifted low, sharp, hurried. "She'll break soon," he whispered. "I'll make her look insane." "No one will believe her." "Not after this." A pause. A muffled reply. Another voice, faint but real. Someone was on the other end of the line. My blood chilled. He wasn't just trying to destroy me with the crowd tonight. He had help. A co-conspirator. Someone feeding him, guiding him, maybe even cheering as he tore me apart. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained calm. If he thought I would crumble, if he thought whispers in the walls would scare me, he was wrong. Because whispers are only dangerous if you don't answer back. And I was ready to answer. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. The smirk when he waved those letters. The cruel twist of his mouth as he whispered through the door. My son plotting against me. My son scheming with strangers. The boy I once held to my chest was now sharpening knives behind closed doors. By dawn, the storm had cleared, but the house still felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I walked barefoot through the kitchen, my foot throbbing from the cut, the tiles cold against my skin. Sunlight pushed through the curtains, weak and pale, spilling across the mess of dirty plates, broken glass, and half-empty wine bottles. Evidence of a night I wished I could erase. But then I noticed something new. A shadow where it shouldn't be. On the table, under a napkin, something jutted out. A folded sheet of paper, carefully tucked, almost as if hidden. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. It wasn't one of mine. The handwriting was his. The note was short, scrawled in jagged lines. "Meet me at the shed. Midnight. Don't let her see you." My stomach knotted. The shed, an old wooden shack behind the house, barely used except for tools and forgotten boxes. Midnight. He wasn't hiding just whispers. He was hiding meetings, plots, entire worlds I hadn't been invited into. And the most chilling part? Don't let her see you. He knew I was watching. He knew my eyes had followed him for months. He wanted me blinded. The sound of the kettle snapped me back. My hands shook as I poured the boiling water, steam fogging my face, burning my skin. But I didn't flinch. Pain had become background noise by now. My thoughts raced, tangled, twisted. Who was he meeting? What secrets lay inside that shed? And most importantly, what role did I play in his plan to erase me? The day stretched endlessly. He avoided me, slipping out of his room only once, his eyes darting like a thief's. He didn't look at me. Not once. That hurt more than his screams, more than his accusations. The silence between us was a canyon too wide to cross. By evening, I had made up my mind. I would go to the shed first. If he thought he could outsmart me, if he thought he could bury his secrets in rotten wood and shadows, he was wrong. I would dig them out. I would expose them before he could twist them against me. When midnight came, I moved like a ghost. The grass was wet under my feet, dew soaking the hem of my nightdress. The moonlight painted everything silver, sharp, unnatural. The shed loomed at the edge of the yard, crooked, silent, waiting. My hand reached for the rusted latch. I hesitated. For a moment, I thought I heard voices already inside, low, hurried, overlapping. My pulse spiked, my breath caught. I pressed my ear against the wood. Words floated through. "She doesn't know." "Not yet. Keep it hidden, hidden." That single word sliced deeper than any other. I pushed the door open. Slow, quiet. The hinges groaned. And there, in the dim beam of a flashlight, I saw it. Something that should never have been mine to see. The beam trembled as I stepped into the shed, cutting through dust like a blade. My breath hung in front of me, tiny ghosts in the stale air. The smell hit me first. Oil, mildew, and something sweeter beneath it. A scent I hadn't expected. Perfume. A woman's perfume, sharp and floral, impossible to reconcile with my son and his shadowy meetings. For a moment, my mind refused to accept the evidence. Denial is a good friend when you want to keep your heart in one piece. Boxes lined the walls, stacked like secrets. Tools hung from rusty nails, their silhouettes sharp and silent. In the center, on a battered workbench, lay a small pile of things: a phone, a wallet, a cigarette pack, not his brand, and a set of keys that weren't mine. My hand hovered above them, fingers numb, as if touching those objects might make the truth explode into sound. I picked up the phone. The lock screen showed a name I didn't recognize, and a photo of my son laughing, arm thrown around someone whose face was half in shadow. I thumbed it awake like a thief, and the messages spilled out, short, coded, urgent. Tonight's the night. Make sure she's gone. He'll handle the rest. The language was clinical, cold. The conspirators weren't children. They were precise, practiced. My fingers tightened around the phone until the plastic dug into my palm. Rage rose like an animal behind my ribs, hot and hungry. How many nights had he whispered with this person while I bled in the kitchen, while I tried to stitch our family back together? How many plans were made here, in the dark with false smiles and lightered cigarettes? I slid open the wallet. Inside, beneath a faded receipt and a stray coin, lay a photo. It was small, creased at the corner, my son, younger, beside a woman I didn't know. They looked close, too close. My vision blurred. For a second I saw them at a fair, sun on their faces, free and unburdened. The memory stabbed me because it showed a version of him I once believed existed. Someone tender, unguarded. But the present had stripped those layers away. This photograph was a lie, or the last honest thing he had before he chose shadows. A soft rustle behind me made me spin. For a beat, I expected my son, or one of his allies, to step from the gloom with triumphant smiles. Instead, a small scrap of paper fluttered from the rafters, drifting down like a confession. I snatched it up. It was a receipt, dated 2 weeks earlier. An address, an hour, the name of a clinic. My pulse stuttered. A clinic? For what? Therapy? Counseling? No. The handwriting on the margin matched the jagged letters from earlier. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a plan with logistics, dates, meetings, people booked into rooms where they could stage my unraveling. My knees trembled. I felt foolish, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for trusting the routine of our days, for forgiving when I shouldn't have forgiven. But underneath that self-reproach was something dangerous and clear. I had been underestimated. They thought my body, my age, my bleeding foot, my polite smiles were limits. They thought I would be easy to push away. How wrong they were. I stuffed the phone and the receipt into my nightgown pocket, my hands steady now, my breath controlled. The storm of hurt had shifted to a colder purpose. I would not let them assemble a narrative of me without me in the room. If they wanted to prove something, I would be the last to let them choose the evidence. I closed the shed door behind me, the latch clicking like a countdown. The moon watched me, indifferent from above. As I walked back toward the house, the grass whispering at my ankles, a car pulled up at the end of the lane. A single slow headlight sweeping the yard, then stopping. Tires crunched gravel. Someone was coming up the path. My heart dropped to the floor. The figure that emerged from the black wasn't a stranger. It was Aunt Layla, her coat buttoned tight, her perfume cloying in the night air, alone, unexpected, her face unreadable. She paused under the porch light, and her eyes found mine like a judge passing sentence. She smiled, small and practiced. "I thought you should know," she said, voice low. "He's already told them everything." The ground tilted. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, to demand what everything included, but she stepped closer and pressed a single folded envelope into my palm. Her hand was shaking. Her eyes were wet. "Read it," she whispered. "Before he shows them." My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. The first line burned into my skin, to the family and friends assembled. "By tomorrow noon, the truth about your mother will be clear. She is not the woman you think." I looked up. Aunt Layla's gaze didn't waver. Behind her, the house leaned silent, counting the seconds to ruin. The envelope slipped from my fingers and hit the grass. My mind flashed to the locked door, to the papers in my son's hand, to the photograph in the wallet, to the voice upstairs whispering, "Make sure she's gone." I should have burned the words the moment I saw them. Instead, I did the opposite. I read the next line, and what I learned made the world tilt so hard I almost fell. The letter still burned in my hands, even though I had folded it, even though I had tucked it deep into the drawer beneath the spoons. Words have a way of searing themselves into your veins. His words, my son's words, a public execution written neatly in ink. "She is not the woman you think." All night, those lines tangled with the sound of the storm until I couldn't tell which was thunder and which was betrayal. By morning, my reflection in the kitchen window looked like a stranger's. Hollow eyes, blood drying on my heel, shoulders squared not out of strength but necessity. The house was quiet, too quiet. He hadn't left his room. No footsteps, no doors opening, no coughs or careless laughter. Just silence, thick and expectant. But silence is never empty. It holds whispers, secrets, the hum of things unsaid. I poured coffee, black, bitter, letting the steam sting my face awake. My hands shook as I gripped the mug, but I kept my spine straight. If he wanted me broken, I would not give him the pleasure. Not yet. At 8 o'clock sharp, Aunt Layla returned. She slipped through the front door with a soft creak, her perfume still clinging like a shadow. She didn't greet me. She didn't smile. Instead, she sat across the table, folded her hands and whispered, "He's gathering them." I stared. Gathering who? The family? The neighbors? Everyone who was here last night? Her voice cracked. He wants an audience. My stomach turned cold. So the letter wasn't a threat. It was a promise. He wasn't satisfied with humiliating me once. He wanted a trial. He wanted my name dragged through the mud with witnesses nodding along, ready to condemn. Layla leaned closer, her eyes searching mine. "You have to be careful. He has more than the letters. He has stories. He's twisting everything you ever did into something ugly." I laughed, sharp and bitter, then let him. If they want to believe him, let them choke on it. But inside, my chest hollowed. I could already see it, the gathering, the whispers, the way faces would turn from me as though shame was contagious. I could see my son standing proud, papers in hand, lies dripping like honey. And I could see myself, small and silent, drowning under their judgment. No, that wasn't how it would end. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and let something colder settle into me. Vulnerability had carried me this far, but it wouldn't carry me through the fire ahead. From this moment on, I would wear a mask. A smile polished sharp, a voice smooth as glass. If they wanted theater, I would give them a performance they'd never forget. The ceiling creaked. He was awake. His footsteps moved heavy, deliberate, pacing as though rehearsing. I could almost hear the rhythm of his words, the performance already alive in his head. I turned to Layla. "Let him gather them," I whispered. "Let him bring every last one into this house. I'll play my part." She looked at me as though she didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't either. The mask was slipping into place. And beneath it, something sharp and merciless stirred. I finished my coffee in one long swallow, the bitterness biting my throat. The time for weakness had ended. The reckoning would begin under my roof, on my stage, and when the mask cracked, it would not be mine alone. By noon, the street outside my house swelled with whispers. Shadows stretched across the curtains as neighbors gathered, curious and hungry. I stood by the window, watching their shapes blur together, each one a knife waiting to carve its piece of me. They didn't knock. They didn't call. They waited for him, my son, to summon them inside, as if this was his home, his court, his trial. The air inside thickened. Every breath scraped my lungs, tasting of rust and betrayal. Layla shifted uneasily near the door, her hands twisting the hem of her shawl. She looked like a woman trapped between loyalties, and perhaps she was. I could not count on her silence forever. Then, his voice, clear, confident, too confident. He stood at the top of the stairs, letters clutched in his hand, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "They're waiting," he said almost casually, almost as if this was nothing more than a rehearsal, a practice for the grand humiliation to come. I tilted my chin. "And you expect me to sit quietly while you poison them?" He didn't answer. He only smiled wider, then turned toward the door. The sound of the lock sliding open felt like the snap of a guillotine. They poured in. Uncles, aunts, neighbors, friends of the family. Their shoes scuffed the floor, their eyes darted everywhere except my face. Shame is contagious, yes, but curiosity burns hotter. They wanted the show. They wanted to watch me squirm. I greeted them with a smile, polished, sharp. The mask held steady. My voice didn't waver as I offered tea, though none of them accepted. They were not here to sip or comfort. They were here to watch me fall. He gathered them in the living room, positioned himself like a preacher about to deliver the sermon of his life. The letters rested on the table, edges aligned perfectly, like a stack of evidence ready for display. My heart pounded, but I made sure not a single tremor reached my face. Instead, I leaned casually against the wall, arms folded, a smirk tugging at my lips. If he expected tears, he would starve. If he expected pleading, he would choke on silence. He began to speak. His words flowed like oil, smooth, thick, impossible to wash away. He spoke of secrets twisted into sins, of kindnesses recast as manipulation, of love sharpened into control. Each line drew gasps, murmurs, stolen glances at me. He performed, and they applauded with their silence. But I watched them. Every face, every flinch. I read the cracks in their loyalty, the doubt blooming like rot. For every nod, there was a raised eyebrow. For every gasp, a shifting discomfort. He thought he held them, but control is a fragile thing. When he slammed the final letter on the table, silence swallowed the room. My son's chest heaved, pride lighting his eyes, certain he had destroyed me. Certain this was the end. That was when I stepped forward. The mask gleamed as I smiled, sweet as honey, cruel as fire. I let my voice cut through the silence, soft but sharp enough to draw blood. "Are you finished?" Gasps rippled. His jaw tightened. For the first time, a flicker of doubt clouded his eyes. I leaned closer, letting the words fall like poisoned sugar. "Good. Now it's my turn." All eyes shifted to me. I could feel their weight pressing into my skin, waiting, desperate for spectacle. They thought he had already delivered the climax, that the show was over. But they didn't know me. They didn't know that my story had never been one of surrender. It was one of survival. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, each step deliberate, echoing off the wooden floor like a drumbeat. My son's confidence faltered, just slightly, but I caught it. His fingers tightened around the letters as though paper could shield him from me. I bent down, picked up one of the sheets he had flung on the table, and held it up for all of them to see. The handwriting was his, sharp and jagged, as though anger itself had carved the words. I let the silence stretch, the tension coil tighter until it almost snapped. Then I spoke. "You've all read his story," I said calmly, almost warmly. "But tell me, how many of you know mine?" They shifted, murmured. No one answered. I laughed softly, though it cut through the air like glass. "Of course you don't. He never asked. He never wanted to know." My eyes slid back to him, narrowing. "He only wanted to destroy?" Aunt Layla whispered my name, but I ignored her. My gaze was fixed only on him. I could feel my blood humming with fury and something colder. Clarity. "You call me a monster," I said, raising the paper. "But every line here is written by a child who never saw beyond his own bitterness. You twist my love into chains, my sacrifices into sins. Tell me, who taught you to lie so beautifully?" Gasps rippled across the room. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The mask I wore tightened. It gleamed sharper now, cutting through his silence. I turned back to the audience, forcing my voice to steady, measured, like a confession delivered at the altar. "Yes, I've made mistakes. Yes, I've hurt. But so has he. None of you know the nights I spent stitching this family together while he tore at the seams. None of you know the truths he buries under his rage. I stepped closer to him, until I could see the flicker of panic in his eyes. He tried to hold his ground, but the room was shifting. Doubt crept in. I could feel it. You want them to believe you? I whispered, just loud enough for all to hear. Then let them hear it all. Every story. Every betrayal. Not just mine, yours too, he flinched. For the first time, he looked cornered. His lips parted as though to lash back, but the words failed him. The performance faltered. The mask cracked, not mine, his. I smiled, slow and venomous. You see, dear son, I don't fear the truth. Not anymore. Can you say the same? The room held its breath. The letters on the table no longer looked like weapons. They looked like scraps of a failed war. And then, from the back of the room, a voice broke the silence. Low, hesitant, but clear. Maybe she's right. Heads turned. Whispers hissed. The tide had shifted. I stood tall, my mask still gleaming, but beneath it my heart pounded like a war drum. I had won this battle. But the war? The war was only beginning. The house was no longer mine. It had turned into a stage, a court, a battlefield. The neighbors lingered even after the storm of words had quieted, their eyes darting between me and my son like spectators unsure which fighter to bet on. Their silence was heavy, but in that silence, I felt something shifting, something dangerous, something liberating. He sat slumped at the edge of the couch, the letters still sprawled on the table, his mask cracked but not destroyed. His pride held him upright, even as the foundation beneath him trembled. Every so often he'd glance at me, jaw tight, teeth grinding as though he could bite back the tide turning against him. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I only watched. That was enough. Because watching is power. Letting him see that his rage no longer burned me. Letting them all see that I was not afraid to stand in the ashes of his accusations. Layla hovered near the kitchen, wringing her hands. She had not chosen a side, not fully, but the fear in her eyes told me she had realized something. My son was not in control anymore. The thunder cracked, shaking the walls. It jolted the crowd, some shifting in their seats, others standing to leave, embarrassed by their own curiosity. But he refused to let them go. Sit, he barked, voice raw, trembling with desperation. You need to hear all of it. You need to know who she really is. No one moved. Their stillness was louder than any rejection. The storm outside roared, but inside, the storm was his alone. I stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Let them go, I said softly. He shot up, pointing a trembling finger at me. You don't get to command this room anymore. You don't get to play the victim. You ruined us. Enough! The word tore out of me, sharp and cold, and the entire room froze. Even the thunder seemed to pause. I walked toward him, my heels striking the floor like the toll of a bell. My voice dropped, softer, but it carried. You think you hold their loyalty? Look at them. I gestured to the crowd, faces pale, uncertain, shrinking from his fury. Do you see belief in their eyes or fear? His mouth opened, but no words came. His shoulders sagged. The fight was draining out of him, replaced by something I had not seen in years. Doubt. I leaned closer, so only he could hear, though the silence of the room carried every syllable. You thought you could destroy me with half-truths and lies. But you forgot one thing. His eyes narrowed. What? I smiled, not cruel, not triumphant, simply certain. You forgot that the truth doesn't need an audience. It stands on its own. For the first time I saw it, the crack deepening in him, the fragile boy buried beneath the man's fury. He hated me, yes, but more than that, he feared me. Not because of what I could do, but because of what I had already survived. The room exhaled, a collective release of tension. Some stood, slipping out quietly into the storm, unwilling to stay longer. The crowd was thinning, the judgment dissipating, but the war was not finished. Not yet. His eyes still burned with the promise of vengeance. And I knew he would not surrender so easily. And in that moment, as the room emptied, I realized this was no longer about the neighbors, the family, or even the letters. This was about him and me, alone, and the reckoning had only just begun. When the last neighbor slipped out into the rain, silence closed in like a fist. The living room, once bursting with whispers and judgment, felt cavernous, empty, yet charged with something heavier than noise. The storm beyond the walls was nothing compared to the one simmering between us. He stood at the center of it, shoulders squared, chest heaving. His hands still clutched the stack of letters, though now they were crumpled, damp from sweat. They weren't weapons anymore. They were relics of a battle already slipping from his grasp. Still, he clung to them, desperate. "You think you won?" he spat, his voice shaking. "You think they believe you? But I know the truth. And I won't stop until everyone else does too." I tilted my head, studied him. The rage in his eyes was a mask, thin, trembling, threatening to shatter with every word. I'd worn that mask once myself. I knew what lived underneath it. Fear, loneliness, a hunger for control that never quite filled. I stepped closer, my voice calm, deliberate. "What truth is that? The one you've invented? Or the one you can't face?" He flinched. "Small, but I saw it. Tell me," I pressed. "What is it you want? Do you want me ruined? Do you want me dead? Or do you just want me to finally say the words you've been waiting to hear?" He froze, breath catching. His silence was louder than any scream. I let the pause linger, my eyes locked on his. "You want me to apologize? For every mistake. For every wound. For every time I failed to love you in the way you thought you deserved." His jaw clenched. A vein pulsed at his temple. "You did fail me." "Yes," I said simply. "I did." The admission rippled through the air like thunder. His eyes widened, shocked. Not at my guilt, but at my surrender. He had expected denial, defiance. He hadn't prepared for honesty. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a near whisper. "But you failed me too." The words landed like a blade. His grip on the papers loosened. A single sheet fluttered to the floor, soft as a feather, but heavy as a verdict. I crouched, picked it up, smoothed it between my palms. "Do you think these scraps will save you?" "They won't, because the truth between us isn't on these pages. It's here." I pressed my hand against my chest, then pointed at his. "And here, in the spaces neither of us wants to face." His lips trembled. He looked away, but not before I caught the wet shine in his eyes. The mask was breaking. Finally. "You wanted to destroy me in front of them," I said softly. "But the real reckoning is between us. No audience, no applause, just you and me." The storm howled against the glass, rattling the panes like bones. The lights flickered once, twice, casting his face in stuttering shadows. And in those shadows I saw him, not the enemy, not the executioner, but the child I once held. The boy who once clung to me in fear of the dark. But that boy was buried deep beneath years of resentment, and I wasn't sure if he could be pulled back. I straightened, my voice steady again. "So go on, son. What do you really want from me? Because this game of letters and lies is over." He stared at me, chest rising and falling, lips parting as though the answer had been caged for years. And then, at last, he spoke. "I want you to pay." Darkness swallowed the room. Darkness swallowed us whole, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to nothing but the sound of our breathing. His sentence, "I want you to pay," hung between us like a verdict. I could hear the blood in my ears, the soft tick of the clock trying to pretend time was ordinary. My first instinct was the old, raw thing, to curl, to beg, to smother the anger with whatever love I had left. But that version of me had been carved out of the house years ago. What remained now was something colder, steadier, an instrument honed by pain. I reached into my pocket and felt the receipt there, folded, crumpled, proof of the meetings, the shed, the clinic appointments, the text messages on a phone I'd slipped into my gown that night. I had taken those things like a thief, quiet, careful, because I had learned long ago you don't battle a war with words alone. You gather the facts. You keep them close. You wait. The light was gone, but my hand knew where the papers were. I pressed the receipt into my palm as if it were a talisman. You want me to pay? I said, voice soft and flat. The kind of voice that tells a child the storm is real and it's coming. Pay for what? For loving you wrong? For trying to hold a family together when you were busy breaking it apart? I let each syllable land. He flinched. I kept going. If you want a reckoning, we'll have a reckoning. But it won't be the theater you imagined, he swallowed. In the dim, his face looked younger, thinner, the lines carved by rage and sleepless nights exposing the boy beneath. You ruined me, he whispered. You ruined everything. The words were small, but they bruised. I had no illusions that I'd been perfect. The mirror had shown me my own faults for years. But ruin is not a one-way street. Someone has to drive the car into the wall. Maybe I did, I said, and the admission came out like spat coal. Maybe I failed you for years. Maybe I wrapped my needs in a way that bound you. But what you're doing now, this public execution, this conspiracy, this is not justice. It's cruelty. My voice sharpened. And cruelty has consequences. A sound at the door made both our heads turn. A soft, hesitant knock followed by a voice we both knew. Aunt Layla, perhaps, coming back with another whisper. Or one of the neighbors returning with fresh gossip. My skin prickled. The house seemed to breathe the knock in slow motion. He straightened, panic and calculation in equal measure. I opened my mouth to call back that the meeting was over. That the neighbors should go. That this was a private thing between parent and child. When the hallway light flickered back to life like a pulse, and at the window beyond the front door, a silhouette moved. Not the small, stooped shape of Aunt Layla, but a tall figure in a hooded coat stepping out of a black car. The single headlight cut across the lawn, painting everything in hard white. The silhouette paused and lifted a hand, not to knock, but to hold up a small device that blinked blue. A camera. My throat closed. He shoved the letters into his pocket with a clumsy, guilty motion that betrayed everything I had already seen in the shed. The camera's blue eye pulsed like a heartbeat. The figure called out in a calm voice I didn't recognize. We're live. The floor tilted. I had prepared for a crowd, for whispers and folded letters, for the slow erosion of my reputation. I had not prepared for a broadcast, an audience that could not be shamed away, that would swallow every frame and spin it into a verdict more vicious than any neighbor's whisper. Outside, tires crunched the gravel again. More headlights. Voices, rough and professional, carried like a storm front. The silence in the room snapped into a wire of panic. I could see the calculation in his eyes. This had outgrown him. He had called in people who knew how to make pain permanent. And in that cold, electric second, I understood the choice before me. Retreat under the weight of a public lie. Or stand and throw my cards down too. I forced myself to breathe. I put the receipt back into my pocket. I rose, slow and deliberate, and I walked to the door. I opened it. The night outside was alive, rain slicing sideways, headlights cutting the dark into jagged pieces, the blue pulse of that camera winking like a serpent's eye. The hooded figure didn't flinch when I opened the door. He held the lens steady, unblinking, patient, as though he had all the time in the world to carve me apart. Behind him, shadows moved. More people spilling from cars, their umbrellas tilting, their whispers swallowed by the storm. And in that instant, I knew. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was spectacle. He had escalated it, dragged me from the safety of whispers into the merciless glare of evidence and pixels. No longer just neighbors. No longer just family. He wanted the world. My son stepped up beside me, chest puffed, eyes gleaming in the half-light. His voice rang sharp, slicing the air. She's been hiding, lying, pretending. Tonight, you'll all see who she really is. The camera tilted to catch my face, the rain dripping from my hair, the steadiness in my eyes. For a heartbeat, I considered slamming the door, sealing the night out, locking us back in the suffocating silence of our war. But I didn't, because I realized something. Once the camera is on, closing the door only proves you guilty. so I smiled. It wasn't joy. It wasn't defeat. It was steel, a blade disguised as warmth. "If you want the truth," I said, my voice carrying through the rain, "then let it be heard." Gasps. A ripple of surprise from the watchers gathering under umbrellas. He hadn't expected me to step into the light. He thought the storm would drown me. But storms only wash what's already cracked. I stepped forward, rain plastering my clothes to my skin, hair clinging to my cheek. The lens followed every move, hungry. I raised the crumpled sheet of paper, the receipt I had kept like a secret wound, and held it up. The ink was blurred but legible, the date and name still sharp. Proof that his story wasn't the only one written in this house. "You think he's innocent?" I said, pointing back at him, my voice cutting like thunder. "You think these letters are the whole story? Ask him where he was the night the shed lights burned until morning. Ask him who paid for the clinic visit in cash. Ask him why his stories change every time someone presses too close." He froze. Just for a second. Just enough. The crowd caught it. The flicker of guilt. The tightening of his jaw. The twitch in his hand as though he could rip the receipt from mine if the storm would let him. I lowered my hand, letting the paper droop like a flag between us. "You want me to pay? Then pay with me. Pay in front of them all. Because if we're dragging secrets into the storm, we drag all of them." The hooded cameraman shifted, uncertain. The blue light blinked faster, recording every drop of rain, every quiver of breath. The audience murmured louder, no longer just a jury. They were vultures circling, sniffing at blood neither of us could hide. I turned back to my son, my voice steady, unwavering. "You opened this door. Now let's see if you're brave enough to walk through it." His face, caught in that sudden white blaze, was no longer just rage. It was fear, and for the first time I felt the ground shift beneath him, not me. The lightning faded, leaving only the hum of the storm and the quiet terror etched across his face. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The receipt in my hand felt heavier than stone, though it was only paper soaked at the edges. My son's lips parted, his eyes darting toward the cameraman as if to command him, but no words came. The silence was the loudest confession. I seized it. "You all see it," I said, turning to the cluster of neighbors pressing under umbrellas, their faces pale in the stormlight. "You came here for blood, for gossip, for a villain to burn. You thought you'd find her in me." I tapped my chest with the dripping paper. "But look closer. Look at him. Watch his silence. Watch the way the truth strangles him." Gasps, whispers, shifting feet in puddles. They hadn't expected defiance. They hadn't expected me to seize the stage he built. But storms don't ask permission. They tear roofs off. They drown lies. They leave bones bare. His voice cracked when it finally came. "You're twisting everything." "You always twist, do I?" I cut in, stepping closer. "Or do I simply refuse to be buried? Tell them, son. Tell them where the money went. Tell them why you needed to hide it." He shook his head violently, water flying from his hair. "Shut up!" The camera caught it, the shriek, the panic. The watchers flinched, recoiling as though his rage could spray them too. For years he'd hidden behind calm words, controlled narratives. Tonight the mask had shattered, and the raw, desperate boy beneath was spilling out. I lowered my voice, leaning closer so the lens had to follow. "You wanted me to pay, but payment is never one-sided. You demand my sins? Then let the storm drag yours into the light too." For a moment he looked ready to strike, his hand curling into a fist, his body trembling. But then hesitation. His gaze swept the audience, the eyes fixed on him, the camera's unblinking stare. He knew the cost. Violence now would damn him more than any letter, more than any story. So he crumbled. Not with tears, not with apologies. He wasn't ready for that, but with silence. The kind of silence that admits what pride will not. I lifted my chin, let the storm wash across my face. "You wanted a reckoning," I said, voice clear, steady, final. "Here it is. Not just mine, ours. Etched in rain, caught on film, witnessed by every soul you dragged into this house. The cameraman lowered his device slightly, uncertain now if this was the ending he had been paid for or something far messier, more dangerous. The neighbors exchanged glances, their hunger dimming, replaced by unease. The spectacle had soured. What they had come to consume was consuming them instead. And in that moment, I felt it. Not triumph, not peace, but release. The battle I had fought in silence for years had broken free, loud and raw, and though I bore scars, I no longer bore chains. But storms don't end in a single clap of thunder. They leave wreckage, questions, aftermath. And as I looked at him, my son, trembling, drenched, staring at me like a stranger, I knew the war was not finished. It had only changed shape. The storm wasn't done with us yet. The crowd shifted as the red and blue glow carved through the rain. Some neighbors stepped back, clutching their coats tighter, suddenly uneasy with the part they had played in this theater. The camera tilted down, its bravado fading, as if even the lens understood the line between spectacle and consequence. I stayed rooted. For once, I did not tremble. The storm had already stripped me bare. What more could flashing lights do? The car doors slammed and officers pushed forward, their boots splashing in shallow rivers running down the street. My son flinched at the sight, his bravado leaking out with each strobe of light across his face. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not anger but fear. "Tell them," he hissed, desperation carving into his voice. "Tell them it's not like that. Tell them you're lying." I met his eyes, the same eyes that had once begged me to read him stories, to hold him after nightmares, to promise him monsters weren't real. And yet here we stood. He had become the monster, and I had been painted as its shadow. "No," I whispered. Steady as stone, the officers asked questions, their pens moving, their eyes darting between us, between the paper in my hand and the silence hanging heavy from his lips. The rain smeared the ink, but the truth had already seeped deep into the cracks of the night. There was no washing it away. One officer turned to me. "Ma'am, do you want to press—" I cut him off with a shake of my head. "Not yet," gasps rippled through the watchers. They expected vengeance, expected me to demand his ruin right here, right now. But vengeance is not always fire. It can be water too, slow, patient, seeping into every fracture until the structure collapses on its own. My son sagged against the wall, drenched and pale, trapped between the lights and the crowd. His power was gone, his stage ruined, his audience poisoned against him. And yet, some part of me still ached. Because though he had betrayed me, slandered me, cast me out, he was still mine. My blood, my story, my mistake. I turned to the neighbors, my voice raw but unshaken. "You wanted truth? You wanted a show? Take this memory with you. Not the lies, not the whispers, but this. The sight of a son who tried to bury his mother, and the mother who refused to stay silent." No one spoke. Some lowered their eyes. Others shuffled back into the rain, ashamed, unsettled. One by one, they dissolved into the night, their curiosity curdled into something bitter. The cameraman packed his gear without a word. He knew no one would want to buy this footage, not because it lacked drama, but because it had too much. Too real, too raw, too human, and so it was just us again, me and him. Mother and son standing in the ruins of trust, with only the rain to cleanse what could never be repaired. I looked at him one last time, my voice almost gentle. "You locked me out of my home. You tried to bury me in shame. But tonight I locked the truth to your name forever. Remember that." The storm passed, but the echo would never fade.